Iran is really taking the initiative here. And now, is it Iran and the US? The two sides are clashing again in the Middle East. So, what happens to peace? There will definitely be major upheavals. This is one of the issues I want to talk about today. Also, New York and Florida have each rolled out their own real estate policies, but the policies are completely opposite, like they're heading in totally different directions. It's really a head to head situation. So, what will the future of the US look like? So today, the second topic I want to bring you is about Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, the world's most valuable company. Now, he's being accused of loyalty issues. What's going on with that? All right, welcome. This is Fang bringing you the show. Fang here with Good Morning America. Hello to all our YouTube viewers and to the listeners of Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. Hello, everyone. If you enjoy news analysis that has context and depth, especially when it comes to breaking down what's really behind the news, then don't forget to subscribe to the Fangway Time channel right now. That way, you'll be the first to get notified whenever we update with a new episode every day. That's why you should subscribe. Also, I'd like to invite our longtime viewers to share this program so that more Chinese friends can learn about what's really happening behind the news. All right, now let's move on and make sure you watch until the end. At the end, I'll talk about something special. There's a hidden twist in Trump's speech during his visit to China. It's really interesting, so make sure you listen until then, all right? Okay, let's get right into the main topic. We'll talk about how Iran has turned the tables and how peace now seems out of reach. In the past 24 hours, two things have happened. One of them was a bit of a blunder. Many of you might already know about it. Iran's national TV announced, hey, we've gotten our hands on a draft framework for negotiations between the US and Iran. They went ahead and made it public, listing out points 1 through 8, basically saying that, according to this framework agreement, Iran would restore commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz to pre-war levels within a month. The US would withdraw its troops and lift the naval blockade of the strait, and then Iran, together with Oman, would manage it for a while before eventually handing it over to the United Nations. And then, well, there were some other things too, but I won't go into detail. The market immediately got super excited, and oil prices dropped 5% on the spot. But then, 2 hours later, the US said it was nonsense, that nothing like that had happened. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that yesterday, Iran harassed US forces and commercial ships by launching 4 one-way attack drones at them. As a result, the US F-18, F-16, and F-35, 3 types of aircraft, successfully shot them all down. The F-18, which is the Super Hornet, the carrier-based fighter jet, then went to the source before the 5th drone could be launched. This was at Iran's Abbas port, which is in the southern part of the Persian Gulf. They tracked down the ground control station that was preparing to launch the 5th drone and took it out. So, of course, Iran was very unhappy about this. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard, in retaliation, launched a ballistic missile at the US Air Force Base in Kuwait. So this was an exchange of fire during the ceasefire period. Yesterday, Trump held a cabinet meeting at the White House, not at Camp David as originally planned. During the meeting, Trump said that Iran is negotiating with the few remaining weapons it has left. Negotiating on fumes means the lamp is about to burn out, almost gone. So in that kind of situation, they're negotiating. That's what he meant. In addition, he said that both sides are getting close to reaching an agreement, but so far, there still hasn't been a result that satisfies the US. He said they're trying to outweight me, meaning they're using delay tactics, dragging things out until the midterm elections. Trump said they think they can just stall for time. They think I have to worry about the midterm elections, but he said he doesn't care about the midterms at all. Okay, so when a reporter asked if he would accept Iran and Oman jointly controlling the Strait of Hormuz, Trump responded tough, saying, no way, nobody can control the Strait of Hormuz. The US will ensure its openness. If Oman wants to control it, he said, otherwise, then I'll just blow 'em up, blow 'em up. Everyone was left speechless. He added, oh, they'll be fine, basically making a joke out of it. But in reality, he was issuing a threat to make Oman think twice about teaming up with Iran on this. We all know that the northern coast of the Strait of Hormuz belongs to Iran, and the southern coast belongs to Oman. So Iran wants to pull Oman into the water so that he could, this is what they call managing the strait. Pulling in another party as a buffer, which would make it seem a bit more legitimate. But when Trump was in the meeting, he just said one thing. If they dare to do it, blow up the gate too. So that's the situation. Then a reporter also asked, now it's said that Iran is willing to transfer its enriched uranium to a third country, like Russia or China. What do you think? Trump flatly refused, saying, "That would make me uneasy." But he said it politely. Let me translate for you. It basically means, no way, not happening. All right, so yesterday, there was another incident involving Iran. The chairman of the Parliament's National Security Committee, his name is Ibrahim Aziz, posted on X saying, Iran's red lines, our red lines. So, what does red line include? It covers three things. First, the right to possess enriched uranium. Second, maintaining a stockpile of enriched uranium. Third, controlling the Strait of Hormuz. All three of these are things that Trump absolutely cannot accept. He said these are their red lines, meaning they absolutely cannot be given up. At the same time, he's calling for all sanctions against Iran to be lifted. Aziz also criticized President Trump, accusing him of seeking a deal with Iran just to save himself, to get out of what he calls the strategic deadlock of the Iran negotiations. So, as you can see, is Iran taking the initiative here? First of all, Iran's own TV station took the lead in releasing the terms of the agreement, and the US was forced to come out and deny it. In the past, whoever took the lead would be the first to announce the terms, and the weaker side would have to issue a denial or try to argue their case in front of the public. But now it's Iran announcing the terms and the US issuing the denial. So this is a sign that Iran is taking the initiative. The second point is what I just mentioned. What's it called again? Iran's parliament? The chairman of the National Security Committee openly stated, my red line is such and such, basically telling the US, you need to respect my red line. These red lines are completely unacceptable to the United States. So basically, Iran wants to set the terms for the negotiations itself. That's what this means. So does it seem like Iran is taking the lead here? I think that's exactly what's happening. So how should we view all of this? Let me share my thoughts. First of all, Trump is still thinking from a right-wing perspective. Right-wing thinking, yeah, wanting the other side to surrender. Why is that? Because actually, Trump doesn't want to keep fighting. Basically, he's saying, I've already set the bottom line. Just don't let you have nuclear weapons. Before, it was about not letting them have ballistic missiles, not letting them have a navy. The navy's already been pretty much dealt with. And also not letting the other side, train or develop forces in various places. That's what it's about. Local forces and such, Trump isn't emphasizing those things anymore. As long as there are no nuclear bombs or nuclear missiles, that's enough. Sorry, as long as there's no nuclear program, that's fine. So in this situation, Trump thinks that while the other side is facing the threat of devastating strikes from the US, he's also extending what you could call a very acceptable olive branch. The other side should be okay with that. So really, it's a right-wing approach. But obviously, the chances aren't great. Why? Because the other side will absolutely never give up their nuclear weapons. I've been saying this for days now. Second, when the other side sees that Trump has no real desire to keep fighting, they'll just get even tougher. All right, so in this situation, would Trump be at a disadvantage? Not necessarily. This is what you call things reversing when they reach an extreme. When Iran gets so aggressive that it pushes Trump into a corner, and Trump comes to the conclusion that there's no way out unless this regime is dealt with, that the whole situation can't be wrapped up otherwise, then the situation will flip again. Of course, this is just common sense, right? When it comes to a regime like Iran's, you either don't take action, like Vance said, don't get involved, or if you do take action, you have to see it through to the end. You can't just stop halfway. Right now, Trump wants to stop halfway, but it seems pretty clear that it's going to be very hard to do that. So if Trump really does take action, if he takes the next step, I'm saying if he takes action again, it doesn't matter if it's for 2 months or for a year. Then Trump really won't care about the midterm elections. What he said about that is true. In other words, when Trump can withdraw troops, he wants to withdraw. He doesn't want to fight, as long as the other side can accept his terms. But if negotiations fall through, if it comes to fighting, Trump won't prioritize the midterms. To be clear, he'll consider them if possible, but if not, he won't. He really has this carefree attitude. Because honestly, even if you lose the midterm elections, so what? And even if you win them all, so what? Right? That's why I said, with the filibuster in place, anything controversial just won't get through, unless you get rid of the filibuster with something like the Save America Act. That's a very typical example. So for Trump, it actually doesn't matter much. Just like the first 2 years, he can still get things done, at least within a certain scope. Okay, let me broaden the discussion a bit. Let's talk about the highlights of the midterm elections and the current situation. First, have you noticed that during the primaries, which are still ongoing and will continue until June, Trump is essentially purging the party, clearing out the non-Trump faction. So far, this process has been going very smoothly. Second, the redistricting maps are currently very favorable for the Republican Party. Of course, as was mentioned yesterday, both Alabama and South Carolina, just yesterday and the day before, got stuck on this issue. In the end, they both decided not to redraw the maps. This is exactly what I was talking about yesterday. When it comes to redistricting, there are moral considerations within the Republican Party. They face a moral dilemma, a kind of moral confusion or moral obstacle that holds them back. But regardless, even without Alabama and South Carolina, when it comes to redistricting, the Republican Party is still, well, way ahead. Third, let's talk about the macroeconomy. I don't know how everyone feels, but the macroeconomic situation is favorable. Corporate profits are currently very strong. Jobs are also being created continuously, and wage increases have been pretty good. Now, the only issue left is the fourth problem, which is the cost of living. The cost of living because of rising oil prices. Oil prices are just one example, right? Because oil prices really mean energy costs. When energy costs are high, the cost of everything goes up. So this is a threat to the midterm elections. So now, if Iran can be dealt with before the midterm elections, or even if it's settled 3 weeks before the midterms, then oil prices might come down. But if it really can't be resolved, then as for Trump, whatever happens with the re-election, it is what it is. That's the situation. Speaking of the cost of living, let's talk about Iran. We all know that on February 28th, after Iran shut down the internet and started the war on February 18th, Iran cut off internet access. So for 3 months, Iran was in complete darkness, no internet, nothing at all. Now recently, the Iranian government feels like they've pretty much stabilized things, so they've started gradually lifting internet restrictions, allowing people limited access online. But as soon as people got back online, a tidal wave of public anger flooded Iranian social media. According to The Guardian, as soon as people could finally access social media again, it was filled with post after post, every single word a heartfelt complaint from ordinary people about the pain and suffering caused by rising prices. So right now in Iran, the price of vegetable oil, cooking oil, has skyrocketed by 300%. Chicken has gone up by nearly 200%. Even rice, which is a staple food in Iran, has increased by 170%. One medicine said that everything is so expensive, it's like a disaster. Every time you go to the market, you leave with a broken heart because you've spent all your savings but can't buy much of anything. He said it's just too tormenting. We can't even manage the most basic life anymore, and we don't have the patience to keep holding on. So how is the Iranian government responding to this historic wave of public discontent? The official stance is to issue stern warnings, claiming that behind all this resentment, there must be cognitive warfare orchestrated by enemy nations. The question whether there are foreign forces at play, stirring up social tensions to incite the public and spark street protests. But no matter what you say, if prices are high, they're just high. So the official statements can't really calm public anger. Now, polls among the public show that only 9% of people still support continuing the internet restrictions, not even 10%. So even some Iranian celebrities, including a rapper named Salehi, have boldly spoken out on X, stressing that access to the internet is a basic right of the people. It's definitely not something the government is giving out a charity. So for these Iranians who have just returned to the internet after enduring 3 months of darkness, the food they can't afford on their tables is the most real and urgent survival crisis. I think this is Iran's opportunity. Trump can't always try to decide a country's fate through military force or negotiations between politicians. In any country, water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it. If the people rise up, things will change. Of course, in the past, people would go out into the streets, unarmed, chanting slogans, facing things like, what do you call them, machine guns, submachine guns, or even sniper rifles firing at them. Of course, no one can stand in the way of that, but if you really give the people resources to change the regime, then of course they can do it. So, especially if you look at the polls and such, the Iranian regime's popularity is getting weaker and weaker in this situation. So, should Trump use the people or not? Right? Yeah, exactly. Well, let's just hope that President Trump can see this soon. The key to solving the Iran issue is first and foremost regime change. This regime must be dismantled. How do we dismantle it? What methods should be used? We just hope that the United States can find a way out. All right, now let's talk about what New York and Florida each plan to do, okay? Let's start with what the mayor of New York wants to do. As for the New York market, this guy, Mandani, yesterday, in a public setting, launched what he calls block by block. What does that mean? Block by block means tackling things one building at a time. What does that mean? He said there are a lot of buildings in New York where the owners are neglecting their duties. This makes tenants unhappy, so when necessary, we will take aggressive legal action. This is called get rid of, removing those negligent landlords and property managers. As for those buildings that have been neglected for a long time, we will work to transfer ownership to responsible managers. What does this include? It includes so-called community trusts, nonprofit organizations, and even the tenants themselves. What does this mean? Let me translate it for you. It means that if a landlord is negligent, doesn't take good care of their rental property, or even just any property, not just rentals, if you own a property and don't take care of it, that's actually pretty rare. Usually it's because the expenses outweigh the income. You know, after they fix something, what they earn back isn't enough to cover the costs. So in this kind of situation, they just won't do it, right? Okay, so when something like this happens, they'll take away their ownership. Haha, to put it simply, what is a community land trust? What is a community land trust and what is a nonprofit organization? What does it mean when tenants themselves are basically being expropriated? Let me translate that for you, because where do these nonprofits come from? They weren't just born out of nowhere. They exist specifically to do these kinds of things. So basically, it's about taking from the rich and giving to the poor, right? That's what it is. Where does this approach come from? What's its origin? Let me break it down for everyone. Some people say this means Mondani is really trying to bring about public ownership in New York. So where did this come from? You all know that when Mondani was running for mayor, he made a lot of promises, right? He wanted to improve people's lives, especially the lives of the poor, so there would be free public transportation, free childcare, free stores, and free housing. There were a lot of things promised, but up to now, not a single one has been accomplished. Why? Because every one of these things requires money. So where does the money come from? There are only two ways, right? One is to collect taxes, and the other is to borrow money or find some other way. Now, as for collecting taxes, if you want to impose an income tax in New York State, the state government won't allow it. Unless you don't want to get reelected, because of this income tax, New York City can't levy it. The mayor can't impose it. He doesn't have that authority. If he wanted to, the whole state of New York would have to do it. And the state is run by a different group of politicians. Unless they don't want to get reelected, would they dare to raise the income tax and upset the voters? So the governor of New York says, no, I'm not doing that. So what can they do? The only option left is to raise property taxes in New York City. Now that's something the city can actually decide for itself, but the city council won't go for it. If we raise property taxes, all the rich people in New York will leave, and then what are we supposed to live on? So the New York City Council won't go for it. So as a result, Adams had to come up with another idea, a special tax for non-New York residents. If you own $5 million worth of real estate in New York, they're going to impose a special tax on you. So what happened in the end? Can you really stop people? They can just get rid of any real estate over $5 million and leave. For example, the hedge fund Citadel, their CEO, their boss, he just said, fine, then we'll just cancel our $1.6 billion project in Manhattan. And what happened? Over the past 2 weeks, Adams either invited people in or went himself to meet with them. Goldman Sachs, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, even JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley all went to talk with them. They're worried these companies will leave, and right now, Wall Street really is moving out. For example, we all know Morgan Stanley. It's the biggest investment bank in the US. Morgan Stanley now has more employees in Dallas, Texas than it does in New York on Wall Street. So obviously, it looks like Wall Street is gonna move to Dallas, Texas. That's why he's feeling really anxious right now. So basically, raising taxes is useless. All those clever tricks he thought of just won't work. The second option is borrowing money. What does it mean to borrow money or issue bonds? When the government issues bonds, generally speaking, any government, including the federal government, you know why the US national debt can get so high? It's because they keep issuing bonds. The government issues bonds because it still has credit. So whenever you issue bonds, there will always be someone willing to buy them, right? As long as you offer a high enough interest rate. But New York state law stipulates that neither the state of New York nor any of its municipal governments can have a budget deficit. The management is extremely strict. In other words, you can't just issue bonds. To put it plainly, this is already the law as it stands. If they want to get around this and issue bonds, how could they possibly break this law? Changing the law would be even harder than issuing bonds, so this leaves New York's socialist mayor with no way out. If you can't borrow money and can't issue bonds, what do? He was forced to come up with a third solution, the one I just mentioned, confiscating property. Huh, my goodness. So, how does he confiscate property? In New York City, there's a law called 7A, officially known as the 7A program. Well, anyway, in Chinese, it's called the Real Property Litigation and Procedure Law. In it, Article 7, Section DA, what does that refer to? It's a law that protects tenants, allowing the court to intervene when a landlord seriously neglects the interests of their tenants. That is, when the living conditions are really bad, it allows a third-party administrator to be appointed to take over management. But if this kind of takeover happens, if the court rules for it, the landlord still retains ownership of the property, but loses the right to manage it. However, once the building or property has been repaired and meets the required standards, it must be returned to the original landlord. So this is the 7A. This is currently the only thing Mandani can rely on. But this 7A law does not permanently transfer ownership to the city government or the tenants. It only provides a temporary transfer of management rights under court supervision. But what Mandani just said in that video, which I won't show here due to copyright issues, he said, "We will strive to transfer ownership to responsible managers." They're talking about confiscation. Can he really do that? Let me tell you, he absolutely can't. He's just come up with another dead-end idea, meaning it's a road to nowhere. If he tries to do this, he's basically confiscating people's property. How would he do it? Actually, he has his leverage, because the housing inspection department and the licensing department are all under the mayor's control. All he has to do is nitpick and find faults. That's it. That's why he just called it aggressive. It's just more aggressive. This kind of housing management strategy can take away management rights. He can say, "You're not in compliance with this or that." As a result, I can immediately order a citation and with that, take away your management rights. Can he do that? Within his authority, he can do it, okay? But after he does it, in the end, after he gets the management rights, can he really confiscate someone else's property, take away their house? Can he take it back? Can he get it into his own hands, into the hands of the city government? Can he hand it over to those trusts or give it to those nonprofit organizations? He can't do it. Why? Because he'll immediately be taken to court, and in the end, he'll be found guilty of violating the Constitution. So this involves a bit of knowledge about the US. Basically, in America, we all know that private property is inviolable, right? That means whether it's the money in your bank account or your house, in the US, no one can touch it. They can't just take your stuff away. A few days ago, a follower from Guangdong told me something that really left me speechless. He said he had deposited 300,000 RMB in a bank in Guangdong. But actually, it wasn't him. It was his younger brother who had deposited 300,000 renminbi. And then, his friend also deposited 300,000 RMB. When his dad was hospitalized, they needed to pay the bill. Unlike the US, where they treat you first, in China, you must pay up front. His dad was in an urgent situation, but they insisted on payment. He told them his money was locked in the bank, but they wouldn't budge. He went to the bank and ended up bribing the manager. The manager asked, "If you give me 50,000 yuan now, I'll unlock your 300,000. He replied, "Unlock it first and I'll pay you immediately." Then, in the end, he ran to the police station to report it. The police said, "How much are you going to give me before I'll deal with the bank?" Wow, when I heard that, I was like, is this for real? Seriously, it's just unbelievable. So these kinds of things in the US, this would all be considered a violation of private property, which is absolutely not allowed. How is this guaranteed across the entire US? How do you know that some city government won't do this kind of thing? There are two things that guarantee it. One is the Fifth Amendment to the US Constitution, which says, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." What does that mean? It means that no one can be deprived of their life, freedom, or property without proper legal procedures. Just this one sentence covers it all: life, liberty, and property. Property is included here. That's the first thing, but this only applies to the federal government. Then there's the 14th Amendment, which was passed after the American Civil War. There's a clause in the 14th Amendment that extends this to all the states. What does it say? In English, it's, "Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So then you might ask, what exactly is due process of law? The 14th Amendment also explains this. If private property is confiscated without just compensation, that is considered a violation of due process. What does that mean? Let me translate it for you. It means this. If Mayor Mandani really wants to take over that so-called mismanaged property, or even if he just insists it's mismanaged, he has to pay the owner the market price before he can take it. So that's not really taking it, that's buying it. And Mandani doesn't even have the money. He's already offering free buses, free tolls, free stores, and he doesn't have the funds for any of it. Plus, it looks like he's opening his first store next week. He somehow scraped together some money to open that first store, but he never had any money to begin with. Where would he get the money from? To buy up these properties he thinks are unqualified, right? So even if he buys them, they wouldn't really be his property, would they? It's basically just paying money to buy something back. That's just a normal transaction. So Madani just can't pull this off. With the double protection of the Fifth and the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, it's simply impossible for him to do this. So what he's saying is just empty talk. Of course, we all know, even if he somehow managed to confiscate it and handed it over to some nonprofit organization, to put it bluntly, that's just the government managing private property. Confiscating it for the government to manage, what's the result? In the end, it'll all be squandered away. There is no way he could make that real estate thrive. If even the property owners themselves can't make it work, how could he possibly do it? It's other people's money. Nobody cares. But the real issue now is that both New York law and the US Constitution don't allow him to confiscate it. In other words, the American system is so tightly structured. If you want to implement socialism here, it's really tough. So now, as everyone knows, it's incredibly frustrating. Every day feels so confusing and infuriating. The official at the center of all this is Mayor Mondani. He wants to push his socialist agenda, but he just can't make it happen. They won't let him raise taxes, they won't let him borrow money, and they won't let him confiscate property. So what can he do? Honestly, trying to take the socialist route in America is really, really hard. Isn't that right? Well, anyway, we know he still wants to go down that path, right? Because he really believes socialism can work, and so do the voters who elected him into city government.